At this organization, body art signifies a lack of self-control. These harsh words echoed as the young woman settled into her interview seat. Her qualifications went unread by anyone present. All attention focused on the small phoenix blossom adorning her wrist before they determined unsuitable. She calmly collected her documents and departed amid cruel mockery. 7 days afterward, the conference room doors opened and everyone became motionless as she entered the platform, presenting herself as the organization's new chief executive. Arya Voss stood there at 27 years old. Her ebony hair was arranged in an uncomplicated ponytail. She wore no cosmetics, no ostentatious accessories, simply a basic navy jacket, a white shirt, and pants that appeared purchased from a regular department store. She didn't conduct herself like someone born into one of the nation's most affluent families. She had no need to. Her parents had taught her to appreciate moderation, to allow deeds to speak more powerfully than appearances. However, that moderation, that quiet power caused people to misjudge her. They observed her simple attire, her unrefined appearance, and that small tattoo, a delicate phoenix blossom etched on her wrist, and they concluded she was out of place, that she was insufficient. And that day in that interview chamber, they had ensured she understood it. Before we continue, if this narrative resonates with you, if it seems like something you've experienced or witnessed, just pick up your device quickly. Press that like button. Share a comment below about what this signifies to you and subscribe to the channel. It's simply a small method to share this experience to connect with others who understand it. All right, let's continue. The interview chamber had been sterile, all glass and metal with an extended table where the panel sat like magistrates at a hearing. Victor Hale, the Human Resources Director, occupied the center, his suit pristine, his expression set in a perpetual scowl. At 45, he took pride in identifying warning signs in applicants, and he had already concluded Arya was one. Clara Moore sat to his right, 32, her fair hair in a polished updo, her smile razor-sharp. She served as the interview coordinator, always keen to demonstrate her authority, particularly over someone who didn't appear suitable. Several board members surrounded them, elderly men in custom suits, their faces showing a mixture of disinterest and contempt. The atmosphere in the room felt oppressive before Arya even took her seat. She had entered with confident steps, her briefcase under her arm. She gave a courteous nod, her voice composed as she stated, "Good morning." But the instant she offered her hand to shake Victor's, his gaze fixed on her wrist. The phoenix flower tattoo, no larger than a coin, appeared to radiate under the harsh lighting. Clara leaned in, her lips forming a sneer. "We require professionals, not nonconformists," she stated, her voice filled with false sweetness. Victor didn't even glance at Arya's resume. "At this organization, tattoos represent lack of discipline," he declared, his tone conclusive, as if he was delivering a judgment. One of the board members, a silver-haired man wearing a gold timepiece, mumbled quietly, "She probably fits better in a tavern, not here." Several others chuckled softly and maliciously. As Arya placed her resume into her bag, one of the board members, a woman adorned with a pearl necklace and a false smile, leaned forward. "Dear, perhaps consider a cafe position," she said, her voice sweet but harsh. "They don't object to tattoos there." The others laughed again, more loudly, as if sharing an inside joke. Arya stopped, her fingers still on her bag's zipper. She looked at the woman, her gaze unwavering, and asked, "Do you habitually assess people before they have a chance to speak?" The laughter ceased immediately. The woman's smile became rigid, her fingers gripping her pen tighter. Arya didn't await a reply. She rose, adjusted her blazer, and exited, the sound of her heels reverberating in the sudden quiet. 1 week afterward, the entire organization assembled in the magnificent conference hall, a vast area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the metropolis. Staff members occupied the seats, buzzing with interest about the new CEO. The board sat in front, Victor and Clara among them, discussing the rumors they had heard, a young woman, an outsider, someone inexperienced. When the double doors opened wide, Arya entered, her navy blazer replaced with a tailored power suit, her hair still in that simple ponytail. The room became silent. Victor's pen stopped mid-motion. Clara's mouth opened, then closed quickly. Arya stepped onto the platform, her steps as confident as they had been in the interview room. She gazed out at the audience, her eyes composed but intense. "Good morning," she said, her voice projecting effortlessly. "I am Arya Voss, your new CEO." Then she paused, her wrist visible as she adjusted her sleeve, the phoenix flower reflecting the light. "Tell me, does anyone here still believe tattoos indicate incompetence?" The silence shattered as a junior employee in the rear, a guy with slicked-back hair and a nervous smile, snorted audibly. "A CEO with ink. What comes next? Body piercings in the boardroom?" Several others laughed, their voices harsh and derisive. Victor nodded slightly as if the young man had a valid point. Clara leaned toward the person beside her, whispering loudly enough, each for others to overhear. "She's going to destroy our stock price with that appearance." The room hummed with quiet chuckles, the type that hurt because they're designed to ostracize. Arya stood there, her hands positioned on the podium, her expression unreadable. She tilted her head, her eyes locating the junior employee. "What is your name?" she inquired, her voice gentle but audible. He froze, his grin disappearing. Mark," he stuttered. "Sat now?" She nodded once. "Mark, when you're prepared to discuss strategy rather than appearance, I'll be attentive." The room quieted again, the laughter extinguishing like a flame being snuffed out. During a break in the meeting, a cluster of employees gathered near the water dispenser, their voices muted but bitter. A woman in a red blazer, her lips pursed, said, "She has no place here. That tattoo suggests trouble. Probably got it at some dive establishment." Another, a man with an expensive watch, smirked. "I bet she's never even examined a financial statement." Their laughter resonated down the corridor, sharp and thoughtless. Arya, walking by with a stack of documents, stopped just beyond their view. Her fingers tightened on the folders, her knuckles whitening momentarily. Then she stepped forward, her voice steady. "You're correct," she said, her eyes meeting the woman's. "I got it somewhere authentic. Where did you acquire your audacity to speak like that?" The group froze, their smirks disappearing. Arya didn't wait for a response, just continued walking, leaving them staring at the ground. That evening, alone in her office, Arya sat at her desk, the city lights spreading beyond the window. She opened her bag and retrieved a small, worn photograph. A woman with her same dark hair smiled, holding a toddler. Arya's fingers traced the photograph's edge, her eyes softening momentarily. The woman in the picture had been he, or mother, brave and selfless, who had rushed into a burning structure to rescue strangers and never emerged. Arya touched the tattoo on her wrist, the phoenix flower, and her lips formed a thin line. She placed the photograph back into her bag, closed it, and turned to the stack of contracts on her desk. The following morning, the boardroom was filled again, this time for Arya to present her vision. She entered, her suit sharp, but her face bare of makeup, her tattoo visible as she arranged her notes. Before she could speak, Damon Cross, a shareholder in his 50s with a reputation for overwhelming anyone who challenged him, stood up, his voice thundering. "This is an error," he said, pointing at her. "A young woman with a tattoo leading this company. Our competitors will devour us." Several board members nodded, their faces doubtful. Clara leaned forward, her smile returning, but colder. "Employees are already gossiping. They think you're a marketing gimmick." The room buzzed with murmurs, the tension mounting like a storm. In the corridor after the meeting, a group of middle-level managers lingered, their voices low but cutting. One of them, a man in his 40s with a flashy tie and a smug expression, said, "She's probably sleeping her way to the top. That's how these people advance." Another manager, a woman with manicured nails and a tight smile, laughed. "With that tattoo, she's more likely a bartender who got fortunate." They didn't notice Arya standing just around the corner, her hand pausing on her bag as she overheard. She stepped into view, her eyes locking onto the man. "You believe I arrived here through luck?" she asked, her voice low but cutting. He stammered, his tie suddenly feeling constrictive. She didn't wait for an answer, just walked past, her shoulder brushing his as she moved down the hall, leaving the group silent and embarrassed. Arya didn't respond immediately to the boardroom's hostility. She opened her laptop, connected it to the projector, and directed the screen toward the room. A chart appeared displaying a deal she had secured before even assuming the CEO position. A contract worth billions, pulling the company back from the brink of bankruptcy. The figures glowed on the screen, undeniable. The murmurs stopped. Damon sat down, his face ashen. Clara's smile froze. Arya looked at them, her voice steady. "You dismissed me over a tattoo, yet I achieved what none of you could." Several shareholders applauded, tentative at first, then louder. One of them, an older woman with keen eyes, said, "Impressive indeed." Damon's hands clenched into fists under the table, his eyes burning with something darker than anger. The whispers began soon after. Damon cornered employees in the break room, his voice low but poisonous. "She's a wild party girl, unsuitable for leadership," he told them, displaying an old college photograph of Arya at a bar, laughing, her tattoo barely visible. Clara obtained the photo and leaked it to a tabloid. By the next morning, headlines screamed, "Tattooed CEO sparks controversy." Employees gathered around their phones, scrolling through the articles. One of them, a young guy in marketing, muttered, "Maybe she isn't really capable." Another, a woman in accounting, frowned but said nothing, her fingers tapping nervously on her desk. The pressure was mounting, and Arya could feel it in the way people avoided her gaze in the hallways. One morning, Arya entered a department meeting, her tablet in hand, ready to discuss a new project. The room went quiet, but a senior designer, a woman with sharp cheekbones and a condescending tone, spoke up. "I apologize, but how are we supposed to take you seriously?" she said, gesturing at Arya's wrist. "That tattoo doesn't exactly convey executive presence." The others shifted uncomfortably, some nodding. Arya set her tablet down, her movement deliberate and low, oaked at the woman. "You create campaigns, correct?" she asked, her voice calm. The woman nodded, smirking. Arya tapped her tablet, displaying a failed campaign the designer had led, its losses highlighted in red. This conveyed failure. Want to discuss that instead? The designer's smirk vanished, her face flushing as the room turned to stare at her. Arya proceeded, starting the meeting without another word. One afternoon, Arya walked into the cafeteria, tray in hand, and the conversation dimmed. A table of executives, led by a woman in a designer dress who had been at the interview, snickered as she passed. "Look at her," the woman said loudly enough for Arya to hear. "No wonder she conceals that tattoo, probably ashamed to display it now." The others laughed, their utensils clinking against plates. Arya stopped, set her tray down on an empty table, and turned to face them. "Ashamed?" she said, her voice calm but firm, rolling up her sleeve to reveal the phoenix flower. "This is who I am. What are you concealing?" The woman's fork stopped halfway to her mouth, her eyes wide. The table fell silent, and Arya picked up her tray, walking away as the whispers resumed, this time uncertain. She didn't address the rumors directly. Instead, she appeared at work every day, her blazer pressed, her ponytail neat, her tattoo unconcealed. She met with department heads, reviewed reports, and asked questions that made people sit up straighter. One afternoon, she passed a group of employees whispering near the coffee machine. They went silent as she approached, but she stopped, looked at them, and said, "If you have something to say it directly to me." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. The group dispersed, their faces flushed. Later, one of them, the woman from accounting, slipped a note under Arya's door. "I apologize. You're doing excellent work." In a quiet moment, Arya stood by her office window, observing the city below. A delivery truck passed. Its logo faded but familiar. The same one her father used to point out when she was a child, telling her stories of how their family built their empire from nothing. Her hand brushed the tattoo on her wrist, and she closed her eyes briefly, the memory vivid. Her father's voice, rough but kind, saying, "You don't need to resemble them to defeat them." She opened her eyes, her jaw tightening, and returned to her desk where a new report awaited, its pages filled with her handwriting. The press conference came a week later, the room packed with reporters, cameras flashing. Arya stood at the podium, her wrist bare, the phoenix flower on full display. The questions came rapidly, most about the tattoo, the rumors, her past. She raised her hand, silencing the crowd, and lifted her wrist. "This," she said, her voice clear, "is not rebellion. It's a tribute to my mother, who gave her life in a fire, rescuing dozens of people." The room went quiet. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the stunned faces of the reporters. Arya continued, her tone steady but firm. "Every scar, every tattoo tells a story. Don't judge too hastily." She stepped back, her eyes sweeping the room, and walked off the stage. By nightfall, the internet was blazing, calling her the Phoenix CEO. Hashtags trended. Strangers shared stories of their own tattoos, their own losses. The next day, a junior analyst, a nervous kid fresh from college, approached Arya in the hallway clutching a folder. "Ms. Voss," he stammered, I discovered something in the financials." He handed her a spreadsheet, his hands shaking. It showed irregularities in the research budget, small at first glance, but totaling millions. Arya's eyes scanned the numbers, her expression unreadable. "Who else is aware of this?" she asked, her voice low. The kid swallowed hard. "Just me and possibly Clara." Arya nodded, tucking the folder under her arm. "Excellent work," she said, her tone firm but kind. The kid's shoulders relaxed, a flicker of pride in his eyes as she walked away. Damon didn't cease. He called an emergency board meeting, his face red as he slammed a folder on the table. "She's exploiting tragedy for sympathy," he shouted. Clara, sitting beside him, slid a stack of documents toward the board. "These prove she's unsuitable," she said, her voice smug. The papers were fabricated, claiming Arya had mismanaged funds in a previous position. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, one saying, "Perhaps we were hasty in granting her authority." Arya was summoned, the room heavy with suspicion. She walked in, her posture straight, her eyes meeting every gaze without flinching. The accusations hung in the air, waiting to destroy her. Before the meeting, Clara had cornered a young receptionist in the break room, her voice low and menacing. "You saw Arya's file, didn't you? Tell me what's in it," she demanded, her nails digging into her palm. The receptionist, barely 22, shook her head, her voice trembling. "I didn't see anything." Clara scoffed, stepping closer. "Don't act innocent. You're nobody here, just like her." The receptionist's eyes darted to the door where Arya stood unnoticed, watching. Arya stepped forward, her voice quiet but sharp. "Leave her alone, Clara." The receptionist gasped, stepping back. Clara spun around, her face pale, but Arya was already walking away, her heels steady on the tile floor. During a late-night strategy session, a board member, an older man with a tendency to interrupt, cut Arya off mid-sentence. "Let's be realistic," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're too young to comprehend this industry, tattoo or not." The room tensed, eyes darting to Arya. She paused, her pen hovering over her notes, then set it down deliberately. She leaned forward, her gaze locking onto his. "I've closed deals you couldn't imagine," she said, her voice low and even. "Want me to walk you through him?" She slid a folder across the table, its pages detailing contracts she had negotiated, each one a victory for the company. The man's face reddened, his mouth opening, then closing. The others shifted in their seats, some hiding smiles as Arya resumed her presentation, her voice steady as ever. She didn't speak at first in the boardroom. She set her laptop on the table, opened it, and projected a series of emails, bank transfers, and reports. The screen showed undeniable evidence that Damon and Clara had been embezzling research funds for years, funneling millions into personal accounts. The board gasped, their eyes darting to the pair. Clara's face went pale, her hands shaking as she tried to speak. Damon shouted, "Impossible!" but his voice cracked. Arya's gaze didn't waver. "If you want to discuss lack of discipline," she said, her voice like steel, "look at yourselves." The room erupted in murmurs, the board members turning on Damon and Clara, their faces a mix of shock and anger. At a company event that evening, the mood was tense, the room filled with employees and board members mingling uneasily. A senior VP, a man with a loud laugh and a habit of name-dropping, raised his glass toward Arya from across the room. "To our CEO," he said, his tone mocking. "Who thinks a tattoo makes her one of us?" The crowd tittered, some looking away, others joining in. Arya, holding a glass of water, met his gaze across the room. She raised her glass slightly, her lips curving into a faint smile. "To leadership," she said, her voice carrying. "That doesn't need your approval." The VP's laugh died, his glass lowering as the room's chatter faltered, eyes turning to Arya. The fallout was swift. Damon was escorted out by security, his shouts echoing down the hall. Clara was suspended, her office cleared out by the end of the day. The board issued a public apology, praising Arya's leadership. But the real test came at the next company-wide meeting. Employees filled the hall, some skeptical, others curious. Damon, before his exit, had sent a final email to everyone, calling Arya a tattooed, scandalous CEO no one would follow. A few shareholders still loyal to him stood at the back, their arms crossed, waiting for her to fail. Arya stepped onto the stage, her blazer unbuttoned, her tattoo visible. She looked out at the crowd, her eyes steady. "Then let me demonstrate who truly deserves to lead," she said, her voice quiet but firm. During the meeting, an older employee, a man who had worked at the company for decades, stood up, his hands trembling but his voice steady. "I've seen CEOs come and go," he said, looking at Arya. "You're the first one who listens." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a faded tattoo of an anchor on his forearm. "This was for my brother, lost at sea. I was told to hide it for years. You're making it acceptable to be ourselves." The room was silent. Then a few employees clapped, the sound growing. Arya nodded, her eyes softening for a moment, and said, "Thank you." She didn't need to say more. She clicked a remote, and the screen behind her illuminated with a global expansion plan she had built from scratch. Charts showed projected growth, partnerships she had secured, markets she had opened. The numbers were staggering. Stock prices had already climbed 20% in a month, all because of her strategy. The room burst into applause, employees standing, some cheering. The shareholders at the back shifted, one dropping his arms, another nodding slowly. The media, watching from the sidelines, scribbled furiously, their headlines already forming. Arya didn't smile. She didn't bask in the moment. She just nodded once and stepped off the stage. The next morning, a cleaning crew found a crumpled note in Clara's old office written in her handwriting. "She'll never last." It was tossed in the tea, rash, unnoticed, as Arya walked through the lobby, her bag over her shoulder. A young intern, the same one who had been quiet during the rumors, stopped her, holding out a coffee. "I got this for you," she said, her voice shy. Arya took it, her fingers brushing the girl's, and said, "You didn't have to." The intern smiled, her shoulders straightening, and Arya walked on, the coffee warm in her hand. That evening, as Arya left the building, a man stood waiting by the entrance, tall, broad-shouldered, with gray at his temples. He didn't need to say much. When he walked toward her, the security guards stepped back, their heads dipping slightly. He was her husband, a figure so influential his presence alone shifted the atmosphere. He didn't speak, just placed a hand on her arm, his eyes meeting hers. The employees nearby froze, their whispers dying out. One of the shareholders who had been muttering about Arya's tattoo turned away, his face pale. Another, a woman who had laughed during the interview, stared at the ground, her hands twisting together. Nobody said his name, but they didn't need to. His presence said everything. Just before the crowd dispersed, a veteran employee, a woman with graying hair who had kept to herself, approached Arya. She held a small, folded piece of paper, her hands steady, but her eyes bright with emotion. "This was my daughter's," she said, unfolding it to reveal a sketch of a phoenix flower, faded but unmistakable. "She loved yours. She wanted one like it before she passed." Arya's hand paused on her bag, her eyes locking onto the sketch. She reached out, touching the paper gently, and said, "She had excellent taste." The woman's lips trembled, a tear slipping down her cheek, and Arya stood there, her presence steady, letting the moment hold its weight. The consequences came quietly. Clara's name hit the news, her forged documents exposed. Ad on a whistleblower social media account, her reputation destroyed. She lost her consulting contracts, her phone silent for the first time in years. Damon faced an investigation, his assets frozen, his circle of allies abandoning him. One of the board members who had muttered about Arya working in a bar was dropped from a high-profile sponsorship deal, his face no longer welcome at gala events. None of it was dramatic. No screaming matches, no public confrontations, just the slow, inevitable weight of truth catching up. Arya didn't gloat. She didn't turn back to see their faces. She kept walking, her bag slung over her shoulder, her steps steady. She passed a young intern in the lobby, a girl who had been quiet during the rumors, who had watched Arya with wide eyes. Arya paused, looked at her, and handed her a business card. "Keep going," she said softly, then walked out into the evening light. The intern clutched the card, her hands trembling, a small smile breaking across her face. The company changed after that. Employees started speaking up, sharing ideas they had once kept quiet. The board listened, their skepticism replaced by respect. Arya's tattoo, once a mark of shame, became a symbol in the office, a reminder that strength doesn't need to shout. Meetings felt different now, the air lighter, the voices more honest. Arya didn't need to prove herself anymore. Her actions did that. Her silence carried weight, her presence enough to quiet a room. Years ago, a little girl had stood in a hospital hallway, her wrist bandaged, her mother gone. A nurse had handed her a drawing of a phoenix flower, something her mother had sketched while waiting for rescue teams. The girl had kept it, carried it, and later inked it onto her skin, not as rebellion, but as a promise to keep going. That girl was Arya, and she had walked through fire to get here. Nobody could take that away. To everyone watching, this isn't just a story. It's a mirror. It's fitty. Or the times you were judged, dismissed, or told you didn't belong. You weren't wrong to keep going. You weren't alone in your fight, and you're still here, stronger for it. Keep walking just like she did. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.